Hello and welcome, folks. This is John back again for another week of wonderful Chicago Fire Talk. Thank you so much for joining us around the bonfire. I am joined by an illustrious cast of people with far more knowledge than myself. Tim is joining us today. Tim, how are you feeling, brother?
I'm good. Back-to-back road wins. Great to be around. Great time to be alive.
Hard not to feel good with 6 points on the road. We have our illustrious leader, Matthew, back recovering after St. Patrick's Day. Matthew, how are you feeling, brother?
I'm okay right now. Yesterday was a great day. Obviously, Fire 3 points. Fun Saturday in Chicago. Weather was decent. But now it's Sunday, so it's not as great of a day. But happy to be here with you, John, talking about something other than hot takes. That's fun.
Yeah, Matt and I get to be a little more nuanced today. We're not just yelling at each other. And of course, the man with the numbers and all the details, our boy DJ. DJ, how you feeling, man?
I am beating the team in knowledge. This is good.
Always a good sign when the people not involved know more than the people involved, right? That always tends to bode well. But yeah, as we've said, obviously super fun match day +1. Fire beating Toronto on the road last night 2-1. Wonderful goal from Hugo Kuipers to put the game away. Am I getting that right? I feel like in my head I'm spinning that up, but no. Yeah, Hugo Kuipers scored the winner. Gutman scored the equalizer earlier in the half. A lot of fun. We'll get into a little bit of quick first team news. Not too much in the way of updates on Kellen Acosta's injury at the moment. I believe we're still probably a couple weeks out from his return. But the big news is the reinforcement of Sam Williams purchasing his homegrown rights from New York Red Bulls and also signing him to a first team deal. Tim, I know you and I went back and forth a little bit on Twitter talking about it instead of just texting each other like normal people would. Can you give us a quick elaboration on just the roster details there and why that homegrown contract purchase makes a difference?
Yeah, so basically by shipping Gam to Red Bull, they were able to get him his homegrown rights, which basically enables him to go on a certain part of the supplementary roster and not have a cap hit. It's weird. Stuff like signing bonuses can also impact that. It's like really MLS roster sicko level stuff. But the advantage is that there's basically minimal cap hit to what the Fire did. There's the GAN that they shipped to the Red Bull. They had to slide another player over. And in this case, it was, I believe, man, I knew this just the other day. It was Omar Gonzalez, who's now on the senior roster. That doesn't matter. They had to part GAM to have that spot open anyways, so that doesn't impact the roster salary cap situation. Deep sicko stuff. But the important thing is Sam Williams is now going to be available to play, 30 more games for the Fire this year, if that's what it takes.
Yeah, absolutely. And well-deserved in his limited time. He's looked very, very good. I like to think, if nothing else, my impact on the bonfire has been just a little bit more sicko talk. So love that personally. But yeah, really awesome result yesterday. I think kind of to kick things off, we did get a note from Alan just in terms of like his thoughts. Obviously, unfortunately, he is not with us today, but it's something I definitely resonated with. Saw some really awesome movement in the first team, right? We're starting to see Greg's systems come into place. You're seeing week over week, guys are getting comfortable with each other. Sergio Argel really seems to have grown into the game. But yeah, the system really seems to be taking effect. And I think I mentioned this last week too, a really strong front to back line switch where guys seem to be comfortable playing everywhere. Not quite a total football, but not something that's going to be a strong, like set formation kind of minute in, minute out, right? Tim and Matt, I see you both nodding your heads a little bit. I don't know if anybody wants to pick me off there, but super impressed by the way the system has kind of started to flow here.
Yeah, I would agree with you, John. I think you're really, week by week, we're seeing this Greg Berhalter ball, as they famously call it, system develop. My concern is, from what I'm noticing, and yes, large part of the game is, they're growing and growing, but the first 15, 20 minutes have seemed very slow to me. It seems like that Berhalter ball, they aren't getting comfortable until the 25th-ish minute. And that's something we saw very evident, at least in my opinion, in this game, where the first, 15, 20 minutes of the game, they barely had the ball. When they were ball, it was either defensive clearing or they were turning it over in the midfield immediately. And then, they started working the ball into the box a little bit. Probably, I would argue, around the 25th minute, a few minutes before the Hugo goal. The Gutman goal, rather. They started combining those passes. The midfield started clicking. Bomba started making those dangerous runs into the box. And that's when you could see the system really in place. So it's really good. Go ahead, Tim.
Well, I think that it's worth saying that one thing that happened is, it is Toronto's home opener, so they're going to come out in force.
For sure.
Alex Calabrese was there for us. You can see his reporting both on social media, minutred97.com. He said that the national anthems were deafening. The boos for the American national anthem and the cheers to Canadians were singing along. The crowd was singing along to the Canadian national anthem so loudly that the singer just basically stopped singing and let the crowd take it away. He said it was actually a getting chills kind of level performance. So that I think powers them through, especially there's a lot of Canadian homegrown players on that roster. But the other thing, they were just getting outworked early on. And I think that one thing that I think was part of it was, Jonathan Dean was kind of getting cooked a little bit by Tyrese Spicer and Jonathan Osorio playing opposite him for Toronto. Unfortunately, Dean had to come off in the 17th minute with what looked like an apparent concern over a concussion. We don't have an update on that at this point to know whether it's something that will be a concern going forward. And after that, Leonardo Barroso came in. And that, I think, is what really helped the Fire start getting into the game a little bit more, because both the defense as well as the offense started improving pretty significantly as soon as that happened.
Yeah, I think, Tim, to your point there, Matt, everything you kind of described as we're watching, especially the early parts of that game, but really through the first half, there wasn't a moment where I felt like Toronto had that game in control, right? I think what you saw is we have a pretty weak right side of the defense right now. I think Sam Rogers has improved, but he's not on Jack Elliott's level. And you guys know I love Jonathan Dean, but candidly, his work rate is high. There's not much else. And even then, if he can just get up a little bit higher or have slightly better positioning, they don't get that first goal. So I think to your point, Tim, it kind of is right side of that defense getting picked on a little bit early in the game. Sorry, Matt, what were you gonna add?
I was just going to say the fullbacks are so vital to the Berhalter system. And we've seen that on the left with the Bamba and the Gutman overlaps and passing capabilities throughout the beginning of the season. And let's be honest, and John, I apologize if this hurts your feelings, but Barroso possesses a much better technical, physical, and attacking capability than Dean has. And it's crazy to see considering he's 19 years old. But to Tim's point, Barroso comes on, 17th minute, something like that, and immediately changes the impact of the system they play on that right, combining with Ugo and combining with Guti. And that led to several opportunities and inevitably the game-winning goal via Ugo. And it's just really great to see a kid like that come in, making his first not cameo. I don't know how long did he play for in Dallas? I can't remember, 40 minutes, something like that?
15 minutes total.
Yeah, came in the 78th minute, I want to say, so that plus stoppage, and that was it. But it felt like that says something about the impact that he made, though, right? You're this is 40 minutes of play. I think he had 8 total touches in that game. So to get a goal off of one of your first 10 touches in MLS is incredible.
It is. He's a stud. No, I was just going to say he's a stud. I love him already.
Yeah, I made the comment, if it wasn't to one of you guys, I think you were probably in the group I made it in, he's built like Xherdan Shaqiri if Xherdan Shaqiri actually worked out, right? You look at him, if you watch a lot of American football, you hear guys talk about you want your players to have big thighs, big hips, even calves. You want them to be solid. If you look at Barroso, he's built, man. He's not tall, but he is so strong. There was a moment sometime around the 25th minute, he and Spicer kind of collided over top of a ball, and Spicer went flying. It was very clear who out physicaled who there. And so he's basically, and again, I feel sorry. I don't want to sit here and badmouth the guy, but he's Jonathan Dean's work rate with 10 times the talent. And I'm being a little hyperbolic there, but he seems to have a lot of that technical skill and physical ability, along with he's going to be in on every single ball on that side.
Yeah, you could see also that he's a very raw product. I don't remember exactly when it was. It was probably the 25th minute, probably 10, 15 minutes after he came into the game, where he couldn't go forward anymore with the ball at his feet, turned around, tried to make a pass back to the center back, went straight to Spicer, who, by the way, great player. I think he's really talented, very high on the 24-year-old. I believe he's Trinidad and Tobago. But it went right to Spicer, who had a one-on-one with, I believe it was Sam Rogers, or it was Elliot. It was Sam Rogers, probably, because he's our right center back. And it just shows that in reality, although he's put out great shifts to start the season, he's a 19-year-old who's coming into a new league and is not going to be perfect. Very raw product, very, very high potential, which is why I think a lot of fans were surprised when they saw Dean in the first place. And Tim, I don't know, maybe you could allude to this. Maybe it was still some nagging injury. Yeah,
that was injury related, right? That was injury related more than anything else. But I think that also shows that the promise and the pitfall of this roster, right? Like, there was some writing. Ben Wright at Backheeled wrote about, basically before the season started, is the U22 initiative a failure? And there's a lot of guys that are now second, third year players in this league that are on U22 deals, and they are not starting in MLS. Like they're bench players, they're contributors, which is not what you expect for a guy that you spend 7 figures of a transfer fee for, but it is what you expect from a young, unfinished product a lot of the time. And I think that one of the reasons that Barroso is in, like, there's a connection with, the staff, and that it saw him developing up close. So I think that they have more knowledge than, I think, a random 19-year-old player coming in that nobody'd ever seen, except a couple matches here and there and some stuff on Y-Scout and some video. So there's maybe some more confidence there, but like 19-year-olds, the progress isn't going to be linear, and you don't necessarily know what you're going to get in game situations until you see it, because he had not actually had first team minutes in any serious capacity. So we're going to see some ups and downs, and I think the reason that they used a U22 slot to bring in Barroso was because they believe in him, but also because the Fire are up against, some cap issues, and they did a lot of maneuvering to get some bad contracts off the books, but there's still some dead weight, and there's less maneuvering you can do when you're just trying to get out from that many bad deals in the offseason. And so they couldn't use a TAM deal on a right back, while using TAM on everywhere else that they needed to. So it's a U22. It's more of a risk, right? There's going to be times that he does phenomenal stuff, and there's going to be times that he does stuff like, the giveaway to Spicer, like that it's going to cost the Fire a couple of goals over the course of the season.
And I think just on that kind of timeline too, you think about it in the context of this, we talked about it in the context of Tom Barlow, I think, on Hot Takes, right? Like this year is not win MLS Cup. It would be incredible. That's obviously the goal, but I don't think that's the realistic expectation for 2025 Chicago Fire football. It's let's get into the playoffs. Let's get as far as we can, maybe even make a run at the Open Cup, depending on what's ahead of us. But now you have this guy who, candidly, because Jonathan Dean isn't quite at that quality level, Justin Reynolds hasn't shown quite as much, is going to get a lot of run, right? I think the goal is he's your starting right back, if not moving forward, certainly by the end of the year, provided he doesn't show too much and then somebody snaps him up to go play in Europe again.
Cough, John Duran.
Yeah. Cough, John Duran, right? Although honestly, that worked out pretty well for us. So.
Hey, if we can witness a deal that gets $80 million for a guy again associated with a Fire, I mean, that's a positive, right? Like that, it does say something about where the league is in the global hierarchy, that they are in the conversation of a guy that goes from MLS at a young age to the Premier League at a young age, and then is sold for $80 million, also at a young age.
Yeah, and I'll kind of transition a little bit, because kind of staying on that right side, I think one thing that has been not concerning but underwhelming has kind of been the performance of Philip Zinkernagel on that right side. And there was a lot of talk of, is Dean giving you the same care? Is Dean giving you the same treatment that you would get from, a higher level right back? And now we're kind of seeing that play, and he still didn't seem to have quite the impact that you would hope from a guy who's on a TAM salary. DJ, what are you thinking?
Zinkernagel, I think, is still dealing with that knock. There were a few times during the game where he got hit by a player, he got taken down once or twice, and he just kept holding onto his ankle. I think more than likely he's still dealing with that knock, and it's just going to be a case of once that knock heals up, he's probably going to be doing a lot better.
And you could see it just with his speed, right? Like you could see him trying to get the balls a couple of times that were played ahead, and like he knows in his mind how fast he is, and he wasn't getting to where he thought he was getting with it. So I think that's a it'll take time thing. It wasn't a great outing from him. On the other hand, we talked about Spicer. We talked about, I mean, a little bit, not as much maybe, about Jonathan Osorio and how good of a player he has been for Toronto, and that those are the players that were in front of Zinkernagel as well. So um, it was a tough assignment in some ways, but he did worse than a lot of other players around him. I think a lot of that is the injury, and I think if this was a perfect situation, and Marin hadn't been hurt, and if he was at full strength and they had confidence in him and all of that, we would have been seeing a lot fewer minutes out of Zinkernagel and probably better minutes as a result.
Yeah, you could see a lot of promise coming out of from him. I mean, he came into the league with promising talent from what he's done in his 6 or 7 or what honestly feels like 15 different European clubs. And I like the way that Berhalter has used him early in the system, although it hasn't resulted in many goals. I think just 1 assist for Zinkernagel so far this season. But the way he kind of pushes centrally when the ball's on the left over in Bamba and Gutman's head, you saw in this Toronto game, although his performance wasn't good, I think I'd probably give him like a 6'5", 6'6". A couple nice passes. He had received that beautiful pass on the end line by the goal from Pineda, shot it into the box, and you could see the potentials there. And I never connected in my head that it could still be injury based. I just didn't think he acclimated into the league quite yet. But I'm a fan. I got him on the back of my jersey, and I'm really interested to see it. To Tim's point, because what Tim said actually surprised me, how his relationship with Marin is and who's going to kind of take over that spot as we progress into the season more and more.
Oh, I think that the expectation coming in was that he was going to get a lot of minutes. My assumption was a lot of starting minutes, and the other thing that I thought is that he was going to be a backup plan for basically anyone across like the front 3, not the striker as much, but like if the team switched to playing more of a 4-2-3-1 than like a flat 3 with the midfield being a little bit deeper, that he could even play like a central attacking midfielder position, stuff like that. So he was the insurance policy for stuff like if Guti gets called up at some point, or if somebody's injured, or all of that stuff. So it's starting minutes, but it's also like this guy's experience, and he can play in a number of different positions and be a utility player at kind of a high end and still be a contributor.
Yeah, I think kind of hand in hand with that too. Other side of the coin, and I was kind of curious your guys' thoughts, because watching Jonathan Bamba in this game was a little bit frustrating for me. I think this was, and a small sample size, but my least favorite of his performances. And then it occurred to me around the 60th minute, this is the first time he's come off. Like, he's played every minute of every game we've had this year, unless I'm misremembering, but I don't think he's come off the field. I think he's played a full 90 in our previous 3 games, or if not that, very close to it. And realizing, hey, Marin's finally healthy again. He's going to get some minutes back. And I do think there will be some improvement there. Matt, what do you think?
Bamba's really interesting because I feel like the whole fan base is going to harp over the fact that he hasn't scored a goal yet, when in reality, although I don't think his performance was remarkable against Toronto, I think he is the reason we have 3 points. And I'll walk through what I mean. Going to that Gutman goal, obviously Bernadeschi gets the ball in the 18, makes a beautiful run down about halfway towards the middle of the field. Guti steps in, Bamba steps in, ultimately makes the tackle. Gutman gets the ball, he's running down the pitch. Bamba drags out that right back all the way, giving Gutman the tiny bit of space to make that shot. So I think he's really, really, really smart. He knows what he's doing. The goals haven't come yet. They will. I mean, like you mentioned, he has played every single minute so far. He's probably already run a little dragged. It's a physical league. He's coming into a new experience. But I think that was his 3rd assist on the season in 4 games. And I think it's a quality start from Bamba. We know the goals would come. He's talented. We saw preseason, and we've seen the shot attempts and the power behind his feet and his legs, and they'll come. And actually, we'll talk about this later, but I do have him scoring against Vancouver.
I mean, I think that you're right. Like, in some ways, this is his worst game. I think that everyone saw the tape of the first 30 minutes against Columbus when he came out absolutely flying. Now, part of that is Columbus will leave in space, in the back because of how high they go up while they're in possession. But part of it is like now everyone knows who he is if they didn't before. Like, I'm sure he was in the scouting report, but you're seeing how Berhalter is using him. And that just means that he's going to be like the challenge for how you have to create, I think gets harder. And yeah, he has played every minute up until he went off against Toronto. And he's also coming back from an injury. So like that's, I think that he's close to 100%, but that's still a lot of miles on him early in the season. And I think he's, he did create a number of chances in the game. So it's not like he was a non-factor. I just think that a lot of us were expecting goals. Berhalter mentioned early on that he thought he had a really good performance against Columbus, but the thing that they're working with him on is we're expecting you to score goals as well. I think that they'll come.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of add like the one thing I would say is personally, like I think I said this when we signed him, like on one of the first hot takes of the year, was I don't expect him to lead the team in assists, right? I think if you look at his profile based on what he did in Spain, it's like he is very much the guy who makes the pass to the pass. If you look, I think he's tied for like 4th in MLS right now in terms of key passes, with I think 9 or 10. So like, no, that is the criticism is not a lack of goals. It is more so, I think there were a lot of times where he got the ball high kind of corner of the box and just tried to penetrate. And it was like, hey man, I don't know if you're gassed. I don't know if these guys just kind of have your number. You're not getting through. Let's try something else,
Well, it was also
was
desperate defending, I think, from Toronto, right? Like that's the other part of it. Like the team is not 100%. Overall a good roster. I think that they have some decent defenders. I think that they were more than willing to get physical. They were more than willing to kind of intimidate a little bit, not maybe as much as like DC kind of does, but that's a factor as well. And also I think pitch quality was a factor. Like it was warmer in Toronto that day, but you could tell that it had been a frozen pitch in the recent past, and like the ball wasn't quite moving that well, and you saw some like slipping and sliding, and those like final touches don't happen.
I'll also say, John, to your point about him not being a huge assist guy in La Liga, I mentioned this directly after Columbus, and we'll double down that I think he has the capability of getting 15, 20 assists in this league, because as we all know, the quality of the defending in MLS is incomparable to La Liga at this point, 30 years into the league's inception. And as a result, I think he's going to have that space and the time to beat some of these defenders and make those passes into the box. We saw his passing capabilities this past game. He made that beautiful long pass to Hugo right at the top of the 18, which in my opinion, Hugo should have probably done better on to get at least a shot on goal, but it was a nice block by, I believe it was probably Long is my guess. And he's really just going to continue having those opportunities through some of these MLS defenses that are, incomparable to obviously going up against Barcelona's Koundé and all the guys back there. So
Hugo, by the way, I mean, had a phenomenal game. Like he missed a couple of chances that I know that he wishes he had back, but the fact is he was getting those chances, and a lot of that's because of the service he was getting. And I think we're going to talk about somebody else in just a minute that was absolutely critical to that. But he had, I think, one of his best games in a Flyer uniform. In his second year in the league already, and 4 goals on this season. Like the guy he really could have had 5. He could have had a hat trick. I mean, there's like an alternate universe where just like a couple of things are a little bit different, and he's sitting on 6 goals.
Yeah,
in 4
he's
games.
My early season MVP for the Fire. I don't actually think it's remotely close. I know when we signed him, after reviewing the tape, because admittedly I knew nothing about him before we got him, my anticipation was him to kind of play the Nikolic role of sitting in the box, getting the tap-ins, being that grunt in the box, which largely he has actually this season. Most of his goals have been, a foot from the post, if that. But the one thing that he's really impressed me that we haven't had in a striker, and I don't even know how long. I'd be curious on DJ's opinion of this. Is he's turned into a playmaker. I know you guys talked about it last week, but he doesn't sit in the box all the time. He comes out, he receives those passes, he's comfortable outside of the 18, and I think that's a really, really nice change of pace from strikers we've had in the past, rather.
I will say he's doing right now what I thought Roberto Beric was going to do. Robert.
Yep.
Beric, back when he first
making him more foreign.
I'm just
somehow.
making him Italian.
I love it
because I want him to go away. Back when the Fire came down to Florida, the first game in 2020, I watched Beric, and Beric was everywhere. He was all over the field, running up and down. He was helping out the right back, going all the way. That's what we wanted Beric to be, and Kuipers is now doing that, which is great. Kuipers, it's everywhere.
And it's, it's kind of funny because like, he can do both sides of that job, right? Like he can be the guy that taps a ball in he can be the guy that like it was almost like a rugby play of like the way to score on the goal that he had against Toronto. Like it bounces off of like 2 to 5 parts of his body before going in, although luckily not his hand. After that was reviewed by VAR. Like, so he knows where the goal is. He knows how to get, pretty goals. He knows how to get ugly goals, and the ugly goals count the same at the end of the year as the pretty ones. But last year, like my notes on him were not misses a chance, because he wasn't getting the service for that. It was, better hold up play than I thought, or like held on to the ball for a second and like was able to get a good pass off. Like against Dallas last week, he was like flinging in accurate crosses all the time. Like he's got more clubs in his bag than I think a lot of us necessarily expected early on. I saw some of it when I was like looking up tape after the signing. But I think a lot of the voices around their league were like, okay, this guy's kind of like a striker that is a one-dimensional striker, and we're seeing a lot more than that from him.
Yeah, I've been, I know I said this last week too. I've been super impressed, and even more so this week, the amount of times he's dropping back super deep, like into midfield, into the back line almost. I've been super impressed. And it's where I'll kind of, again, like, I don't want to be the guy that keeps being like, oh my God, the coach is so good. Wow. And maybe it's just, stark off the last 2 years of what we've had. But like, it's really impressive the way these players understand their positioning, right? And what we've been able to do in a single offseason. I mean, even yesterday, there were times Barroso's tucking so far inside, he's basically playing a dual 10 next to Brian Gutierrez and just giving these really dynamic looks. So all the credit in the world to Hugo for that. But also I think the system and the way Greg has implemented it has been super impressive to me.
Yeah. And something about the system, something I think we've seen is players that are coming up and beginning to blossom. Whereas for the past few years, there's players that like, I think a lot of us would talk up about their ability and their talent, like homegrowns and other young players. And then they would kind of just stall out. And we're seeing, I think, real progress here. One of the guys that I think that like really was just phenomenal in this game and has been growing game after game is Sergio Orhel Jr. Like he started off, we know that he had some rough defensive mistakes against Columbus, and he cleaned that up. And then Berhalter asked for him to start contributing more offensively, and he started doing that. And I think this was his most complete game. He had a beautiful pass from long distance to Hugo that basically gave Hugo a sitter that Hugo's shot ended up going just wide. That should have been a goal. He had a shot off the post in the 27th minute. I asked him about it after the game, and he's like, he would basically, this is an exact quote, but he's like, dude, I was like ready to start celebrating. I just was sure that was going in. Everything but, and he said that he thought that Milkman got a touch on it. It looked like it from the views that I saw on the broadcast, which, unfortunate, but like still, like the fact that he's thinking that, it just shows that he's becoming more of a complete midfielder.
It's
in front
really
of our eyes.
interesting to watch Sergio develop. Obviously, this was a guy that in the preseason, and correct me if I'm incorrectly assuming this, but most of us imagine would probably not be starting day one next to Kellen Acosta and Brian Gutierrez. And of course, due to injuries, Kwame is unavailable. Sergio comes in, has a rough first game. And I think he really, really, really benefits from the Berhalter ball system. The way the midfielders work off each other is really beneficial for his game. And you're starting to see that confidence, like Tim alluded to, the confidence and the ability really come to peak. Now, I believe he should have had his first assist. Hugo definitely should have done better regardless of Milkman got that ball. But Sergio making that step up into what everyone's been talking about, his capabilities being, is really important. One, for the depth of this team. Now, all of a sudden, you have a battle with Sam Williams. Not a battle, but you have Sam Williams, and then Kwame will come back, and then Acosta will come back. And that's really, really helpful if you have 5 or 6 midfielders who are high quality, considering when we entered opening day, all of us were concerned about our midfield depth and the lack of it. And it's really, really great to see this 19-year-old come out firing on all cylinders.
And it's been game on game progress, right? Like, and if he keeps on going at the rate that he's going, which obviously is not going to happen, I mean, like, he's going to be Kamavinga by the end of the season. Like, the dude is really improving. And look, there's a number of reasons that Kwame was brought in on loan, right? And like, this is part of it. Like, Kwame is not here long term. Kwame will have to fight for a long-term deal to stay in MLS, which will probably pay him better than anything else. And Sergio, I think, knows that his job is to give Berhalter and the front office things to think about whether that's something that they should even have to consider because of the way that he's playing.
Go ahead, John.
Go ahead, Matt. No, you go.
I was just going to shift the conversation to his partner in crime in the midfield, to Mauricio Pineda, who I think worked really well. And I think I just read John's mind right there, who had a really, really nice first start of the season for the Fire. This is a guy who's been around with the club since technically the Paunovic days. If you want to debate me on that, you're welcome to. Yeah, if you're welcome to debate me on that.
No, has done it. He's been here since the De Los Cobos days.
Yeah, well, that's true. In the academy, he came up through the academy, right? He came up through the academy. There was a first team deal that was negotiated under the Paunovic front office, under the Nelson front office. It was not signed until the ink wasn't put on the contract until the Heights had come in. But that was that train was going under the station.
100%. And he's done everything that's been asked of him now under 4 coaches. He's played center back, he's played CDM role, he's been a sub, he's been a starter. And I think, this performance today shows me how valuable Pineda is to this team as the defensive central Swiss Army knife that Zinkernagel is for the attack. He came in, made some really, really excellent defensive tackles throughout the game, had a beautiful pass down to Zinkernagel to set up that chance in the first half, and overall put in a really, really high quality shift. And I think that just goes to continue to show this building of depth in the midfield that we have through a Berhalter system is really, really great. And in my personal opinion, Mari's the type of guy that every team needs, a Chicago-born kid coming in, putting in the hard work when he's called upon. And if I can go one step further, I think he should be fired for life.
I don't disagree.
There's a good chance about that. I mean, and you saying Chicago-born, everyone, it was an entirely Chicago midfield. 3 Mexican-American kids that came up through the academy. Pineda left for a bit, played college ball, came back to the Fire. Brian Gutierrez and Sergio Orahel, they all, after the match, they all get along. They train together in the off season. They hang out off the pitch, which is awesome. And they were just 3 of the 5 academy products that were in the starting 11 for the Fire alongside Andrew Gutman, who I think we all know the story of him not signing a first team contract initially, came back, always wanted to come back to the Fire and did so. And then Chris Brady. And that's incredible to see. Half of your starting 11 is built by your academy. And it's something that I think we'll be seeing more of. It's the vision for the club going forward. And it's cool to see it kind of bear fruit this early, even if it's partly because of, some things kind of not going the way that you want with injuries to Acosta and
one other person we need to talk about who has had a very big improvement is Sam Rogers. Rogers has done a lot better since he got his first start. So I made a note of this, but Rogers completed 91 passes yesterday. Which, of course, a lot of them were back passes and passes between him and Pineda and Barroso and Elliott, but he completed 91, and adding on Pineda and Orahel both completed over 60. So that's a bit of a dominant performance, I'd say, when it comes to passing. Even though it's a lot of back and forth, it's that's a lot of good passing.
And when you look at the passing network, you're right. A lot of it was back passes, but a lot of it was, that's still something that you want to see. And he was, I think, better on defense. Still not, I think, at the level that Elliott is. But again, Elliott has been one of the best defenders in this league for the past few seasons. So that's not a fair comparison. It's good to see the game-on-game improvement. I thought, based on what I was seeing from him in training early in the preseason, that it was going to be a tough choice for Berhalter between him and Turan for the starting center back alongside Elliott. It looked like it was going to be an easy choice when Turan was healthy for a little bit, but now I think that as Turan gets back to game fitness, which should be soon, it's getting to be a harder choice again for him. And I think that we may see that switching off a little bit. I know that Berhalter wants stability, and Jack Elliott's talked about the need to develop communication strongly with your center back partner and stuff like that. So I think that says a little bit about his preferences there, but it was still impressive to see.
Yeah, I think this is kind of both topics, really. I think Morey was a good one, and I think Rogers is maybe an even better one. Really good kind of transition into talking about next week's matchup with Vancouver. Quick little info hit, right? Vancouver sitting 4-0-0 after a win at Dallas, which I'd love to sit here and downplay, but I came in last week and said, wow, what a great win at Dallas. as of now, the only perfect team in MLS. Philly currently trailing in the 66th minute against Nashville, but that could change, I suppose. And so I kind of I'll keep the topic on Sam Rogers, right? Because I think the big spirit of this game might end up being candidly Sam Rogers, right? He's going to be kind of the weak point on that back line. I think we're likely to see Leo Barroso get the start. And he'll be tested, right? Even with Ryan Gauld and Brian White out, that Vancouver defense, the way they send their balls in, tends to be pretty intense, right? They lead MLS in, I believe, in corner kicks, and also they're top 5 in crosses. So we can kind of keep it on Sam Rogers there. Tim, I think to your point, more than likely to continue starting purely for the communication and the consistency there. He has improved week over week, but I think he's going to be maybe the biggest player to watch in terms of what determines the outcome of that Vancouver game.
I honestly think that the bigger concern is going to be getting production for the Fire. They've been, Vancouver are perfect partly because they've only allowed 2 goals. Like, I know that they've scored 9 on the other end, but I think that those defensive performances have been a big part of it. And we've seen, we talked about this, like we've talked about some of Bamba was amazing early on against Columbus, and then maybe a little bit more anonymous a few games later against Toronto. And I think that we'll have to see a more complete defensive performance from the entire roster. Like we barely mentioned Brian Gutierrez at all. He's going to need to have a better game than he did this one. And you know what? Not everyone is going to have the best game of their lives in any given match. And we talked about the 2 other midfielders, and that just means there's less oxygen for Guti. So it's not saying that he had a bad game, but I think that we're going to have to see top level performances from more people than we did against Toronto to get a good result. And I think
this game in particular is going to be really interesting for the defense because, the absence of Brian White, who got called up to U.S. camp, and the absence of Ryan Gauld, who's nursing a hamstring injury.
It's a knee capsule, right knee capsule sprain. So he should be back in a number of weeks, but not. It would be absolutely stunning.
Yeah,
if he was
stunningly
back
awful, Tim, you would say. But I think that puts our defense in a position to be very successful. Obviously, Vancouver is a good team. We've seen that. They just knocked off Monterrey at Monterrey to advance in CONCACAF Champions Cup, and they have more attacking talent. But now, like Tim mentioned, my head then kind of turns to the attack and what they're able to do to break down Tristan Blackman and the rest of the guys in the back line for Vancouver who have had a stellar start to the season. Overall, though, it is going to have to be the most complete performance of the team because this is going to be the toughest of the 3 road trips, even without the absence of the 2 stars for the Whitecaps.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that one thing that's worth saying is that Vancouver significantly outperformed their XG, and I think that they're on a little bit of a heater with that. Now, you can do that when you've got talented players that are performing at their level consistently. I think a lot of the talent, like we mentioned, is not going to be in that roster, but it's going to be a case of battening down the hatches defensively as well as creating more offensively. I think there's going to be a similar intensity and atmosphere in Vancouver to what we saw against Toronto. And I think that the Fire have to be ready for that. And I think that they have to come out better and quicker just to get the result that they want. I mean, coming back from, being down back to back in MLS is difficult, especially on the road. Doing it 3 games in a row is, I haven't even looked at the numbers on that. It does not happen often.
I think the one thing I'll kind of interject, guys, because obviously I think I'm not disagreeing the attack is going to play a big part in this. I think rewatching that Vancouver Dallas game, the one thing I saw kind of repeatedly is that if you break that press, right, which is now down Brian White as well, who's a huge part of that, his work rate is high. There's going to be opportunities, right? And I think this offense has looked better in transition than it has in possession in a way, right? Both those goals against Columbus were in transition. I think when Bamba and even Zinkernagel and Brian Gutierrez can get into space, or we saw against Dallas, Hugo Kuipers can get into space, there are going to be opportunities there. And we talked about it a little bit beforehand, this Vancouver team, second in MLS in terms of aerial duels, and Miami is first. Miami has had less than half. So they are far and away the best team in aerial duels in MLS. I don't think this is a game where we are, preying on corners and crosses to win. I think this is something where you've got to score in transition and get out ahead. And I think if Sam Rogers, Sergio Orhel, Maury Pineda can break that press and open up some of those wide players, that's where the opportunity to score is going to come.
And I think that's it. Like, I think that Vancouver, they're not like playing the kind of ball that I think has been so successful for Philadelphia up until, I guess, maybe facing Nashville, although that score could very much change. But I think that they are a team that wants to press. I think that they are a team that doesn't want to build through possession as much. And that's going to especially be the case when you don't have Gauld and White in the offense. I think that they're going to be vulnerable then to leaving space in behind when you break through that press. And I think that the Fire have to be willing to kind of use that building up through possession to try to create numbers through different areas of the pitch to get numerical advantages and score that way. And I think that they've got the talent to do it. Like, early on, we were kind of seeing the midfield get bypassed through that a little bit in the opening games of the season, as like Orhel was getting his sea legs in and stuff like that. That game-on-game progression that we've been seeing from him, I think, is going to be key to getting this to actually work, because I think that Vancouver will be vulnerable, and if you can kind of get them to fall into a trap by knowing the pressing triggers and destabilizing them by using that against them, I think that the Fire will be able to score more against them than anyone else has, which is just one goal maximum. So like, I'm not asking for a lot here. I guess Rayado scored 2 in CONCACAF, but the Fire's roster is not the same as Monterrey's.
Yeah, I'll kind of ask you as the Zinkernagel guy, if he's, and I mean DJ as well, since you're the one who brought this point up, like if he is still not at 100%, maybe I'm off the wall here, but I'm curious to hear like thoughts on potentially sliding in, depending on his health, like Amarin to start on that right wing, just to kind of take advantage of his speed to move in transition. Potentially even an Omari Glasgow, who we've talked about him a little bit. Like, I do think the biggest benefit he has right now is he's quick, man. He can move.
Well, I mean, if we're basing this argument on injury, then we have to make it known that Marin is coming back from an injury sooner than Zinkernagel has. So if we're using that log,
yeah, it's depending on health.
But, I think Zinkernagel still fits that pace. Obviously, game to game, Marin and Zinkernagel bring different things to the floor. Who's going to be more effective against a Vancouver? Yeah.
Well, against a Berhalter.
Yeah, against a Berhalter
in Vancouver. Yeah,
we'll talk about it.
That's why I said that. But which guy is going to be more effective against Vancouver, where there happens to be a Berhalter, is obviously Greg's call. Would I be upset if I see Zink sit and come off the bench in the 70th minute of game to give Marin a go? Absolutely not. I think right now they're very interchangeable, and I'm interested to see what Greg's going to do from a tactical standpoint.
I think it's still Zinkernagel, to be honest. I mean, we saw it, like, this isn't hypothetical, right? Like, we saw Marin. Now, obviously, I think that injuries are a factor with both of them, but we saw Marin play for a half an hour plus once you factor in stoppage time and stuff like that. Probably about 40 minutes in total. And he was not having one of his better games, and like, that's not everyone is going to have a better game. It was his first minutes of the year. He didn't get to play in preseason because of the injuries. So, I think that those are all caveats, but that kind of shows what his level was like last Saturday. And I think to expect tremendous improvement in 1 week is maybe too much. And of the two, I still think that Zinkernagel was the better performer. Although, I think that what we're all kind of saying here is that there needs, with Barroso in, there's now more coming through the right side than there was earlier, right? And I think that that's something, if you become a team where like you can just basically plot every attack coming from one side, you're going to be easy to defend against. And that was the issue with the Fire with Shaqiri early on. It's like, if every ball was going to go through Shaqiri, it was pretty easy to mark him because he wasn't fast enough to kind of work through that. So being, available to attack through both sides is critical, but Zinkernagel wasn't able to sort of take advantage of Barroso being in and providing that extra option and that support. Somebody's going to have to, whether it's Zinkernagel, whether it's Marin, whether it's Omari. I would say that it's probably those three in that order, in terms of the, who we're likely to see. And we saw Omari coming in on the left for Bamba, and I think that he looked good there. I think he actually looked better than we've seen from him all year. I don't know if that's really so much an issue of it being left versus right side. It's just the opponent, the game state, and all that. But it shows that is something that he's more than capable of doing. So I think that maybe Omari stays on the bench for, hopefully you get a couple goals up, then you feel confident, you take Bamba off, help keep him a little bit fresher than the Fire have been able to so far. And then that means that Marin would be the guy on the right if it is Zinkernagel that starts.
Kind of flipping the script a little bit. We talked about Ryan Gauld out with the knee injury. Brian White joining the U.S. men's national team for Nations League, correct? So down two key players, kind of looking back at the rest of that roster. I mean, you alluded to it, Tim, but Sebastian Berhalter may be a little bit underrated on this Vancouver roster. Just to put it into like perspective, same number of key passes according to MLS, the MLS statistics as Jonathan Bamba, right? So a player who is maybe not getting quite the impact in terms of scoring and assisting, but still connecting play really, really well. And then you have Vite as well, who has I think leads their team in assisting. He's got 4 assists this year. So still a couple of guys left there. The question, I guess, kind of what can you do with them? And that is where it hurts to be down Kellen Acosta, but
I think it's important to say, like, Berhalter's playing deeper in the midfield than Bamba is. Like he is a midfielder, sort of like in the same mold as like what we're seeing from Sergio Orahel, and kind of similar to the role that Guti's being asked to play, but I think he's kind of more being asked to have two-way duties than Guti really is, and I think that's a key difference, both with like the number of key passes and stuff like that, as well as like he's not necessarily going to show up on the score sheet as often, even when he's having really good games. And I mean, frankly, he's been having really good games lately. I thought he was fantastic against Dallas.
I have to ask
Saturday.
the question: is this the first time in MLS history there's a father-son matchup, but one's obviously the manager and one's the players? Anyone know? Because this is cool.
I doubt it.
It
Yeah,
cannot be.
I think because Bob Bradley, I think, has faced off against Toronto. Well, Michael was on the quad.
Right. That's a very Blaine one.
Yep, that happened when he was. Because Bob Bradley definitely was at LAFC while that happened.
My ball knowledge is poor. Then, oh my lord.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tough.
But it's the first time that it's happened with this coach.
I was a quarter right.
That'll be an insane
victory lap.
Both have Chicago Fire connections. There you go.
The joke that I made was when Berhalter left the national team job, is that really what he was doing was clearing the way for Seb Berhalter to get called up to the national team, because I thought he's had that potential. He hasn't really played up to it yet, but obviously if it happened when Greg Berhalter was still in the coaching seat, the cries of nepotism that have sort of hounded him unfairly would have just gotten so much louder.
Yeah, absolutely. The one,
and actually as an assistant, like Josh Wolf and his son have probably faced off against each other.
Josh Wolf had 2 sons,
but Josh Wolf obviously originally coached.
Yeah, both of them. That's how wrong.
Originally was coaching Austin. Yeah,
he's played both of them, Matt. No, I'm just kidding. And I think the one last thing I'll kind of add on that, just kind of the midfield piece. I do think being down Kellen Acosta is very unfortunate, but having Mauricio Pineda, who, for what it's worth, pretty good in the air, and has obviously a stronger defensive mind, but is comfortable in possession, could be super helpful in kind of disrupting the midfield in terms of connecting play for Vancouver. Like Tim, you said before, like they're not somebody who wants to hold the ball and hold the ball and hold the ball. They want to move it. So having another player in there who can just who can maybe play a little more defensively, wouldn't be the worst thing.
Now, my question is, I haven't looked at the schedule in terms of like father-son coaching things. I'm kind of stuck on this. Is Phil Neville going to face off against his son Evander in Cincinnati this year?
Wait.
Don't be saying that.
Wow.
Come on.
Remember that quote where he's like my second son, or like my second child, which is wild because he already has 2 kids of his own. So I'm like, man, that sucks. That one of his own children was relegated to 3rd spot over behind a player. Right. Yeah. Well, I asked a journalist who covers the Timbers about it, and he's like, the daughter's number 1. So unfortunately, sorry. That's why the Neville the younger is getting loaned out.
I do have one more fun stat to add, kind of just in context for this game, and I think we'll get to our picks in a second here. Something that I think will, shade my own selection. I talked a little bit about the aerial stats. Brian White, second in MLS in headed shots behind Christian Benteke, who leads by a wide margin. Fascinating. Jack Elliott in 3rd. You wouldn't think, but he's a lot of those flicks to Hugo, I guess, are counting as shots.
Well, we're seeing some of them were shots, off of set pieces, right? And like that's where that's coming in, and that's why I was joking when it looked like the roster was going to be, like short at striker, and like what happens if Hugo is injured, and like Tom Barlow's not going to go 90 every game. What do you do? I'm like, hey, like has anyone asked Jack Elliott if he'd be willing to do it? And it was joking, but also like kind of not the craziest thing that we'd see in certain situations, mostly offset.
When you're 6'7", you don't have to jump very far. All right, we'll get our picks in for Vancouver here before we wrap up. I'll kind of kick us off just for sake of doing so. I have kind of alluded to this, but I think down Gauld and White, Vancouver may still score. I think they'll have opportunities depending on how Sam Rogers plays, depending on who ends up playing right back when Leo Barroso is on the field, because I doubt he goes a full 90. So I think they'll have opportunities, but I think ultimately that opportunity for counterattack is going to come through. I've got the Fire winning 3-1.
I'm going to be the pessimist of the group in that I think with injuries, Greg's going to treat this game as kind of a just make sure we get back to Chicago in one piece. Of course, the Fire are going to try and play as well as they can, but injuries, a team that is currently in form in Vancouver, which, they won't be their full strength. Yeah.
Playing at home, the Fire are dealing with a time change too. Yeah.
The Fire are going to be, if the Fire come out of it with a victory, that is an amazing result, considering that will be only the second time in history. But my guess is the Fire are going to lose this game probably by a 2-1 or possibly even 3-1 scoreline, because I don't think the Fire are going to be as invested right now, because you have to decide which games are going to be worth it to allow guys to come back. And this is one of those games where it's like, let's let people come back.
I'm going to go ahead and play the middle ground here because, of course, someone needs to do that. And my logic is purely my gambling mind coming into play here. On one hand, first off, I'm going 1-1 tie. Pretty standard, 1 point. I think pretty much everyone would be happy with that. We know that winning 2 games away in MLS is very difficult and damn near impossible if you're the Chicago Fire. As a result, I'm really having a difficult time saying that we're going to get 9 points from our first real road trip of the season, even if we didn't think we'd get 2 road wins in the first place. So on that hand, I'm going with a tie, but I have to give a little credit to the fact that Gauld and White are not there, and that allows us to really push the possession in our favor and work to get a result. So as a result of those 2 combining forces, I'm going 1-1, Jonathan Bamba, and then because it is the battle of the Berhalters, Sebastian Berhalter scores a screamer and goes and celebrates in front of his father's face, because I think it would be hilarious.
I don't know, like, are we starting to do this thing where we're making our score predictions based on the like heat check and leaderboard that we're posting every week? Because if so, I kind like my heart is saying 1-1 because it's a good result. It's going to be late. It's playing on turf, and do you really want to risk guys as long as you can with that? But if we're doing it strategically like that, I don't know. Put me down as a 1-0. So I still get a point. I mean, I think Brady deserves a clean sheet. He wasn't tested a lot, unfortunately, because it made it look like the guy couldn't get a save in Toronto, but he was active and kind of like getting clearances and getting his hands on balls and clearing them out. But a 1-0 is entirely feasible, and I think that sort of like shows that there's not a lot of tools that Vancouver really has right now.
I will say, like I said, if the Fire walk out of here with a win, then that is an amazing thing, because that means that in the first 5 games, the Fire now have 10 points, which I think will be the most they've had since, I want to say, 2009, I think.
Well, we talked about this a little bit, DJ, but if you look at the schedule going forward, they're going to need those points because it is not getting easier. I know that Vancouver has a perfect record, but maybe I'll sound like an idiot by the end of the season, but I feel like they are not going to be on top of the Supporters' Shield standings by the summer. And the Fire are facing basically almost every team that you could put in that category of could be at the top of the Supporters' Shield standings in the next 2 months. So, and like in a row, like there's no easy games in MLS, but there certainly are hard games, and the Fire are having a lot of those hard games coming up in the next 8-10 matches after this.
But on the flippity flip, there's no easy games either. And that means it's not easy for them, Timothy. It's not easy for them.
I said that there are no easy games, but there are definitely hard games. And you know what? The Fire do have the tools to make this a hard game, right? And we've seen the system and how it can make games difficult for opponents. We haven't seen 90 minutes of everything working out perfectly yet. Maybe we never see that this year, but maybe we start seeing it regularly. And if we start seeing it regularly, it'd be a phenomenal time to see it against a team with a perfect record on the road, because I think that the Fire are still not getting talked about. And we've seen that before with like early in Ezra's tenure when the team went undefeated and stuff. Sort of like, yeah, but like, is this real? I think that winning away at the team with a perfect record makes it impossible not to talk about what Berhalter is helping this team.
And I think to that end, Tim, like for the life of me, I can't remember who called the game Saturday, but it was pretty early in. And it might have been right after the first goal. And somebody made the comment of, say what you will, this team has an identity. It's very clear. They may not look this good for the rest of the year. Yep. They may not stay this high. This team knows who they are. They're edgy. They're going to fight you on every ball, and they're gonna work their ass off, work their tuchuses off. Sorry, Austin.
Yeah, Neil Seek and Lloyd Sam on the call, by the way. Yeah.
Absolutely. Awesome, fellas. Anything else to add before we wrap things up here? Wonderful. I'm seeing a lot of blank faces.
If the Fire lose, do not freak out.
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah, if you got 6 points out of this road trip, that's a good thing.
And also, I tweeted this out earlier, but the Fire are one freak bicycle kick away from being second in the MLS through 4 match days, which is really cool. Even if it's not sustainable, I acknowledge that they have to play all the good teams. But still, it's fun to be on top for a minute.
Hey, we are all good here. Quick shout out and thank you to our producer Austin. Does all the back end work to make sure that we sound great and look great. And then a quick reminder: we have another Hot Takes Live episode coming up March 31st at 7 p.m. Myself, Matthew, Joe, Paul, the whole gang. We're going to be on YouTube Live, so a little bit of a change if you haven't watched in a little bit, but it'll be a fun time. Still the same dynamic, still getting folks into to chat, and you'll see that forum come out probably in the next week or two. But yeah, that'll do it for us. I am John, again, filling in for Alan. I'm joined by DJ, Matt, and Tim. Fellas, thank you for being here, and thank you to all the listeners for joining us around the bonfire. And come on, you men in red.
Let's go.